Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent. Here's a question that I see a lot. What minis are good for new painters to start with? Okay, the actual answer to this question is that you should paint whatever you want to paint. Paint anything that gets you excited and gets you to pick up a brush and dive on in. That's a boring answer though. That answer is not spicy at all. So let me give you a spicy answer and then we can argue about it. Here is an actual recommendation for a model line. Chaos Space Marines. This came to me as a revelation. I was painting up this Lord Discordant on Hellstalker, and I was trying my best to make it look nice. I was using a bunch of tricks that I've picked up over the years, and I was really putting in some time. It turned out pretty good, but as I was working on it, I had the epiphany that my tricks weren't as useful as they normally are. Most of the heavy lifting was being done by the design of the model and the absolute fundamentals of painting. Let me show you what I mean. We're gonna paint some Chaos Space Marines without using any tricks. We're starting with black primer. I'm not gonna bother with edge highlights or shading, and I'm not even gonna do a wash. No freehand, no panel lining. I'm just gonna treat this like a simple coloring book and put down a couple of colors. Now here are the fundamental techniques that we are going to use. We're going to put down smooth coats of paint, and we're going to be as accurate as we can. A big part of this is getting a feel for how much you should water down your paint. Every bottle of paint is a bit different, and you'll need to experiment a bit to find a consistency that you like. We're going to use 2 thin coats of paint as Duncan intended. Often that first coat doesn't have great coverage. That's alright. It's more important that it's smooth. Just let it dry and then put down a second coat. And if the coverage still isn't right, there's no shame in throwing down a third coat. I've got 4 Marines here and I'm painting them with 4 different colors. Red for Khorne, green for Nurgle, blue for Tzeentch, and purple for Slaanesh, as is tradition. Now the way these minis are designed, these main colors show up as big patches in the middle of each armor plate. It takes a little while to get these colored in, especially if we need to do 2 or 3 layers over that black primer. The next step is gonna take even longer. I think these minis are great for beginners, but I never said that these minis were fast to paint. Every armor plate is rimmed in filigree and flashy ornamentation. I've got a couple varieties of gold paint for the trim on these armor plates. Again, we need to figure out the consistency that's gonna work well for us. And now, we also need to start being precise. This design element where each bit of armor is covered in trim is what makes these models awesome. People like to joke that in order to paint Loyalist Space Marines well, you need to edge highlight them to infinity. Edge highlighting is a way to add a lot of contrast to the mini and outline the major shapes. Edge highlighting requires a good deal of skill and confidence. There are also a lot of decisions to be made about color mixing and which bits get the highest highlights and which don't. The good news here is that there are no red or green or blue or purple edges on any of these models. All of the edges are covered in metal. What I'm doing here is simple. I'm just coloring inside the lines. All of this trim is adding contrast to the minis and outlining the major shapes. I put it to you that this trim is kind of like a super straightforward version of edge highlighting. All we needed to do was pick the trim color and follow the guides that the sculptor left for us. And yep, this is time consuming, but it's good practice for accuracy, and it's really contributing to the look of these minis. Many people recommend that beginners paint using a lot of washes. Starting with a zombie in contrast paint is certainly an effective way for a beginner to paint some minis. On the opposite end of the spectrum, here we are being careful. We're learning to get paint to a useful consistency, and we're putting it down exactly where we want it. For all of this, I'm just using a cheap synthetic brush from a multi-pack. I'm not a beginner anymore, but this is still useful practice. And it's also very relaxing as long as you're in the right state of mind. I think this stage right here makes a great case for this model line. We've put down 2 colors so far, no highlights and no freehand. This is just a 3D coloring book with 2 colors, and these models already look pretty sweet. Of course, the black primer is working as our third color. There are some segments that look good in black, like the flexible joints behind the knees. Black also works for a lot of the other details. Weapons, belts, and pouches all look fine black. For variety though, I did add some steel metallic paint to some of the weapons. I also used brown for some of the belt pouches. We're up to 4 colors plus the black primer. I've got a tiny brush here that I pretty much just use for eyes. 3 of the Marines are getting bright green lenses, and 1 of them is getting bright red. I neatened things up a bit, and yeah, these are looking pretty good. Nothing fancy, just solid fundamentals. Just painting by numbers, coloring inside the lines, and using multiple thin coats. The armor color is spread evenly throughout the models, and so is the trim color, so the finished paint jobs end up looking nice and balanced. Of course, there are plenty of ways that we could continue to spice up these models. Using some wash to do some panel lining would be a great next step. Instead, I'm gonna pause painting these 4 Marines right here. I'm gonna show you some options for more advanced painting on this sweet Lord Discordant on Hellstalker. First though, I wanna show you something else that you can do with chaos magics from the warp. Check this out.
So right there, do you want the well springs or? So as you can see right here.
Dave, does the studio want to buy me a Reaver Titan? Hey. Okay.
Alright, so what you saw there is me possessing Mini Wargamer Dave and getting him to buy a whole bunch of raffle tickets for the Nova Open Charitable Foundation. Dave has spent too much time dabbling with warp energies, and that makes his mind easy to corrupt. I painted that Hellstalker as part of an army that's being raffled off. 12 of us contributed time to paint units for this big Khorne army. Dave painted Karn the Betrayer. That guy sure loves chaos. The painting team decided on a color scheme, and we standardized our shades of red and gold. We went for a classic Khorne look with some dramatic shadows. These are chaotic engines of war, but we decided that they'd be depicted in a relatively clean working condition. The raffle is live at the time of this recording, and it supports the Fisher House Foundation. I wanted to paint this model as well as I could, because I do want people to buy those raffle tickets. So here's my try-hard version of painting Chaos Space Marines. Instead of a flat red color, I used my airbrush to make transitions from black to red. I started with black primer, and then sprayed on splotches of dark chaotic red. Next, I highlighted that red with some scarlet. Then I pulled out my paintbrush and a pot of gold. I started that long process of painting the trim. Again, this is pretty simple, but it's good practice and it's kinda relaxing. Now since we're being a bit fancy, after a base coat of dark Balthazar gold, I went back over some areas with Gehenna's gold. At the end, I even did a few sharp highlights with a bit of pure silver. Now just like the simple Khorne Marine on foot, the main colors of this model are the red armor and gold trim. I filled in some steel bits and other knickknacks, but the real key to this model is getting the armor to look as good as it can. We used Agrax Earthshade to add even more contrast to the armor. Here you can see that I'm carefully laying that dark brown wash into the borders where the gold meets the red. If I were to kick those simple Marines up a notch, this is exactly what I would do. This is straightforward and methodical, but the time that I'm putting in is really paying off. On the creepy fleshy bits, I used washes liberally to give an organic look. On the cloth, I used a stippling technique to add some texture. I even did a teeny bit of freehand on the banner. I did my best to make this model look spiffy. As I was working, I was trying to figure out how to make an interesting video about this paint job. There are some fun little tricks in here, but nothing that I haven't shown in other videos. I realized that at its core, this paint job was all about painting the trim on the armor plates. If the trim on the armor is reasonably clean, then these models are almost guaranteed to look pretty good. That was a little epiphany for me, and that's why I pulled out those 4 Chaos Marines and tested out those super basic paint jobs. Obviously, skilled painters can do incredible things with Chaos armies. There's a lot of room for creativity, especially on some of the really crazy models. I'm super proud to have been a part of this project. Each unit is awesome in its own way, and the army looks great when it's all laid out together. I really do think that Chaos Space Marines are amazing models for beginners. Learn to put down smooth coats of paint. Learn to put paint where you want it to be. End up with pretty nice models. Now the Chaos Warriors in Age of Sigmar have some similar design elements. I really like this line of minis too. In fact, one of the other items in the raffle are my Kagra's Ravagers. I painted these up in the style of the Slaves to Darkness army that I'm still working on. I plan on using the footage of painting these exact models in my upcoming videos. Proceeds for that one benefit Doctors Without Borders. While you're there on the raffle site, there are dozens of other items for you to check out, and you will definitely recognize some of the models and some of the artists. If you're watching this video far in the future, don't worry, the mini painting community is wonderful, and I'm sure there's some other amazing event going on right now. As always, my recommendation is that you paint whatever models seem like fun. But if you're really looking for a suggestion, why not choose Chaos? Well, that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching.